We're going to start off with a panel on key chapters in Harry Potter, and Lana Whited is going to talk about...
Just by way of introduction, we want you to know that this is an idea that Lorrie, Melissa, and I started with last year. I'm not actually going to give my talk right now, but Lorrie, I don't think you have a PowerPoint, right? So if you want to just leave that, I think that's fine. I think this was Lorrie's idea. I don't remember for sure, but what we decided is that we take a slightly different approach from talking specifically about a topic or theme and pick chapters in the Harry Potter novels that we thought were key chapters in which, and maybe this is true of all the chapters in the books, but chapters in which we really see elements that tie into larger themes of the series or the larger architecture of the series. So I just wanted you to know that that's how this came about.
Okay, we'll be starting off with Lorrie Kim.
All right, is that working? Hi, I'm Lorrie Kim. I run the podcast Harry Potter After 2020, and there are badge ribbons and stickers about that podcast out on the free tables. Please take. Chapter 24 of Order of the Phoenix, Occlumency, starts off the second half of Harry's darkest year at Hogwarts. He's just seen through Nagini's eyes in his sleep, and the adults in the Order are panicking, although they stop talking whenever Harry enters the room, leaving the kid terrified. Emotional conditions are unbearable for Harry. He fears being possessed, or that he's tainted, or that he's turning into Nagini or Voldemort. The adults are barely managing themselves, and they can't protect the kids. Dumbledore and McGonagall can't stop Umbridge from torturing Harry. At Grimmauld Place, Sirius doesn't notice that he should be on guard against Creature. He's so depressed that he shuts himself away, and his gloom seeped through the house, oozing under doorways like some noxious gas. Mr. Weasley nearly died. Harry's own mind is no longer a safe place for him to be, especially when he's asleep. Therefore, Dumbledore orders Snape to teach Harry occlumency, the magical defense of the mind against external penetration. It's almost, but not actually, a joke that Harry dreads being alone with Snape more than he dreads Umbridge or Voldemort. As Ron says, I'd rather have the nightmares. Sorry, Mrs. Weasley, what did you say? Professor Snape, dear, in the kitchen, he'd like a word. Harry enters the kitchen to find Snape and Sirius having an excruciatingly immature fight about these lessons. Why can't Dumbledore teach Harry? Asked Sirius aggressively. Why you? Snape says, I assure you I did not beg for the job. He's not answering. Harry asks why he needs the lessons. Because the headmaster thinks it a good idea, said Snape smoothly. You will not tell anybody what you are doing, least of all Dolores Umbridge. He's not answering Harry either. As we go through the chapter, though, we will find that Snape agrees that Harry needs the lessons, and Snape, little as he likes Harry, must be the one to teach them. This is a key chapter, then, because this is the point where Snape and Harry, who loathe each other as much as a student and teacher possibly could, must somehow manage a meeting of minds over occlumency. Snape, as always, resents Dumbledore's orders regarding Harry and channels it into pettiness. If anybody asks, you are taking remedial potions. Nobody who's seen you in my classes could deny you need them. After all these years being forced to collude with Dumbledore's insulting cover story that Snape is too evil to be trusted with a defense position, at least he can pass that resentment along to Dumbledore's favorite student. This pettiness triggers Sirius's protectiveness. If I hear you're using these occlumency lessons to give Harry a hard time, you'll have me to answer to. Harry and the reader watch in mortification as these 36-year-old men regress to name-calling and taunting each other. Snape reverts to projecting onto Harry. He's so arrogant that criticism simply bounces off him, an appalling stance from a teacher. But Snape and Sirius have good reason to distrust each other, like any longtime enemies struggling to forge an alliance in wartime. Sirius brings up Snape's past as a lapdog of a Death Eater. Snape's response demonstrates why he's a valuable double agent for the Order of the Phoenix. Speaking of dogs, said Snape softly, Did you know that Lucius Malfoy recognized you last time you risked a little jaunt outside? Like Draco warning the trio at the Quidditch World Cup, like Ron saving Draco in the final battle and then punching him in the face, Snape is extending protectiveness without affection, one of the key concepts of the series. It's natural to feel protective toward a loved one. It's more difficult to protect people you actively dislike or who wish you harm. This is a clue to how Snape conceals his double agency when Voldemort regularly legitimizes him. How can anyone hate someone as much as Snape hates Sirius or Harry and still risk themselves to protect them? That's something Voldemort and true Death Eaters are incapable of understanding. It's foolproof for Snape to hide his true agenda behind this. And underlying this whole mortifying squabble is the enormous grief of Sirius's arrested development. Harry has to be the grown-up and push these two men apart until a real grown-up, Mr. Weasley, returns from St. Mungo's and breaks the tension. The next day, as Harry leaves for Hogwarts, he and Sirius have a heartbreaking exchange. Sirius gives him a way to call upon Sirius's caregiver protection, but Harry is too worried about his depressed godfather to ever use it. This is what the series calls the flaw in the plan. Now that Harry knows somebody loves him, he can be controlled by his terror of losing that person. Harry starts off the spring term with one win. Cho manages to get him to ask her out. But then, feeling doomed, he descends into the dungeons for his first occlumency lesson. The first thing he sees is Dumbledore's pensive on Snape's desk, a heavy reminder that Dumbledore has authorized these lessons. There have been 2 other votes of confidence in Snape in this chapter. Lupin said, "Harry, I know you don't like Snape, but he is a superb occlumens, and we all, Sirius included, want you to learn to protect yourself, so work hard, all right?" And Mrs. Weasley, usually one of Harry's fiercest defenders, reproached Harry for not saying Professor Snape. Perhaps Snape has never disrespected Molly Weasley. Perhaps he's kinder toward mothers in general. The adults around Harry send signals that they regard Snape with trust. True to form, though, he starts off the lesson by needling Harry with the usual insults. "Surely even you," he says, "could have worked out that the Dark Lord is highly skilled at legilimency, the ability to extract feelings and memories from another person's mind and interpret them. It's not mind reading," he says, "it requires interpretation. And a skilled occlumens can fool Voldemort by shutting down those feelings and memories that contradict the lie and so utter falsehoods in his presence without detection." Harry is never going to occlude Voldemort this way. This is the author explaining how Snape does it. "So he could know what we're thinking right now, sir?" The Dark Lord is at a considerable distance, and the walls and grounds of Hogwarts are guarded by many ancient spells and charms to ensure the bodily and mental safety of those who dwell within them, said Snape. "Time and space matter in magic, Potter. Eye contact is often essential to legilimency." This reminds the reader that Dumbledore has been avoiding Harry's gaze all year. Harry is not the only one who has been protected from Voldemort by Hogwarts. While at Hogwarts, Snape has been able to drop the constant mental burden of occluding Voldemort until now. Snape stares at Harry, thinking hard, speaking slowly and deliberately, weighing what he can tell Harry that would teach him enough while satisfying the demands of both his bosses. Dumbledore has ordered everyone not to tell Harry more than he needs to know, and Voldemort will be monitoring Snape, scanning for loyalty. From this point in the lesson, Snape stops needling Harry with gratuitous insults. He's focusing too hard to be petty. Harry asks why Dumbledore wants him to stop seeing Voldemort's thoughts when it proved so useful for saving Mr. Weasley. Carefully, Snape tells him that the Dark Lord used to be unaware that Harry could sense his thoughts, but the vision you had shortly before Christmas represented such a powerful incursion on the Dark Lord's thoughts. "I saw inside the snake's head, not his." Snape warns Harry not to interrupt him. After all, Snape must keep focus on his tightrope act, teaching a sensitive subject while constrained by the demands of 2 masters. But it's too late. He has revealed something important to this child who has had so little explained to him. Harry did not care if Snape was angry. At last, he seemed to be getting to the bottom of this business. He had moved forward in his chair so that without realizing it, he was perched on the very edge, tense as though poised for flight. Harry has never paid this much attention to Snape before. His hunger for information overrides even his loathing. No one else has given him answers. He's been so scared about himself. How come I saw through the snake's eyes if it's Voldemort's thoughts I'm sharing? Do not say the Dark Lord's name, spat Snape. There was a nasty silence. They glared at each other across the Pensive. They really hate each other? But this is important. Professor Dumbledore says his name, said Harry quietly. Dumbledore is an extremely powerful wizard, Snape muttered. While he may feel secure enough to use the name, the rest of us, he rubbed his left forearm, apparently unconsciously, on the spot where Harry knew the dark mark was burned into his skin. So this is one of those rare moments when we see the real Snape. So Dumbledore can occlude securely without risking any sort of sharpened psychic attention from Voldemort when saying his name, but others have a hard time keeping out Voldemort. Harry sees visions when he's asleep and vulnerable, and Snape, we're reminded, once voluntarily agreed to be branded permanently with something that's responsive to Voldemort's moods. It has to be Snape teaching Harry occlumency because he's the only Order member who, like Harry, can feel Voldemort's emotions in his own body and has experience putting up mental barriers against this degree of intrusion. Dumbledore doesn't run the same risk of having Voldemort in his head, whether by branding his followers with a psychic bond or by scarring a baby. Voldemort has done what he can to make himself less lonely, to get other people to feel the same pain he feels in their own bodies, to know his thoughts in their own heads. Occlumency is defense against the dark arts. It's how to resist inside your own mind when the fascists are in control, trying to get into your head, trying to get you to police yourself, and sometimes succeeding. Timothy Snyder, who is a former keynote speaker for this conference, wrote a handbook on this topic in 2017 called On Tyranny. Dumbledore ordered these lessons for Harry in response to the danger of the dark arts ramping up, just as he ordered lessons in unforgivable curses and hypervigilance for the whole school the year before when he foresaw the resurgence of Death Eaters. Snape snarls at Harry. He was possessing the snake at the time, and so you dreamed you were inside it too. And he realized I was there? It seems so, said Snape coolly. The Dark Lord is now aware that you are gaining access to his thoughts and feelings. He has also deduced that the process is likely to work in reverse. That is to say, he has realized that he might be able to access your thoughts and feelings in return. And he might try and make me do things? Asked Harry. Sir? So if I were Voldemort, I might be very excited to get Harry Potter to attack Dumbledore the same way Nagini bit Arthur Weasley. Protections around Hogwarts? No problem. Harry Potter might be a shortcut. He might, said Snape, sounding cold and unconcerned, which brings us back to occlumency. Snape removes 3 of his memories into the Pensive, then gives Harry blanket permission to use his wand to disarm Snape or defend yourself in any other way you can think of. Snape has removed those memories so he can drop his defenses around them. He's making himself vulnerable for the lesson in case Harry can legitimize him. Not that this makes Snape any less scary. I'm about to break into your mind, said Snape softly. We're going to see how well you resist. I have been told that you have already shown aptitude at resisting the Imperius Curse. You will find that similar powers are needed for this. Snape's lesson plan parallels Lupin's with the Patronus lessons, even if the student-teacher dynamic is so different that it's hard to see this. He describes the objective and then puts Harry through an initial trial untutored to assess his baseline. He even acknowledges Harry's strengths in a different area of defense against the dark arts. Snape is teaching in good faith. Legilimens. Snape sees Harry with Dudley, with Ripper the Bulldog, under the Sorting Hat, with Hermione, fighting Dementors, with Cho Chang. No, said a voice in Harry's head. You're not watching that, it's private. When Harry remembers jealousy or fear, he cannot block Snape, but the thought of Cho enables Harry to resist. Warmth, connection with someone who likes him, these emotions give him something to protect and the strength to protect it. This is Harry's first experience in how to occlude. He physically hurts Snape with an unintentional stinging hex, leaving a scorch mark, but Snape doesn't punish him for this. Apparently, he had meant it when he said Harry could defend himself in any way. Snape can't help asking about one of Harry's memories. To whom did the dog belong? My Aunt Marge, Harry muttered, hating Snape. Child abuse from a family that, as Rowling hints in this volume, Snape actually knows. For the first time, Snape wants to know more about this child. So Harry didn't exactly have the arrogant childhood Snape had let himself imagine. Harry is real to him here. Well, for a first attempt, that was not as poor as it might have been. A compliment. Snape has paid Harry a compliment. He must be really impressed. Repel me with your brain, and you will not need to resort to your wand. I'm trying, said Harry angrily, but you're not telling me how. Exactly. Why isn't he? They try again. Snape sees a dragon, James and Lily waving at Harry in the Mirror of Erised, Cedric's dead body. Harry is overcome, and Snape is paler than usual and angrier. Anger is often Snape's response when he's afraid for someone. Snape's paleness is the same response that Lupin had in third year when Harry heard Lily's and Voldemort's voices during a Patronus lesson. Lupin looked paler than usual. Snape is teaching in earnest, and as happens with teachers, he is being changed by the lesson just as the student is. No lie that Snape tells himself about Harry's arrogance can stand up to the revelation that Harry's deepest longing is for James and Lily, whom Snape betrayed. Snape is so agitated he loses control of his ambiguous facade and snarls at Harry to make more of an effort, or Voldemort will penetrate your mind with absurd ease, Potter. They try again. Harry sees Uncle Vernon, Dementors, and then he sees the plain black door Voldemort has been obsessing about for months and realizes it leads to the Department of Mysteries. I know. He was on all fours again. On Snape's office floor, his scar was prickling unpleasantly, but the voice that had just issued from his mouth was triumphant. Harry is so stunned that he doesn't even care about his scar. He doesn't realize that his jolt of emotion has alerted Voldemort, and the prickling in his scar means that Voldemort is using their connection to pay attention and watch the scene through Harry's eyes. Snape realizes, though, he too has a scar that grows clearer or burns in times of emotion for Voldemort. Snape had lifted the spell before Harry had even tried to fight back. What happened then, Potter? He asked, eyeing Harry intently. What's in the Department of Mysteries? What did you say? Snape asked quietly, and Harry saw with deep satisfaction that Snape was unnerved. Good. None of this cold, unconcerned facade. Someone finally seems upset by everything Harry's been through this year. In agitation, Snape shuts down the lesson immediately and warns Harry to rid your mind of all emotion every night before sleep. Empty it, make it blank and calm, you understand? But cannot tell Harry a single thing about how he's supposed to accomplish this. Not when Harry is rubbing his painful scar and Voldemort is undoubtedly spying on Snape's lesson through Harry's eyes. For the remainder of the evening, Harry feels ill, just as he had the night he had the vision of the snake. He and his friends think it may be because of the occlumency lesson, rather than because of the danger the occlumency is supposed to resist. This is a red herring. Later that night, Harry experiences pain so severe he thought that someone must have sliced into the top of his head. Voldemort is the happiest he has been in 14 years. The Order is losing the war at this point, and it will never be safe for Snape to give Harry instructions on how to occlude. Harry will have to figure it out for himself 2 years later, in Chapter 24 of Deathly Hallows, The Wand Maker, when his grief for Dobby will block out thoughts of Voldemort, the very thing Dumbledore had wanted him to learn from Snape. So that's that chapter.
Questions? Do the three talks. Okay.
I'm going to hold the microphone and hope that it doesn't make any noise because I tend to move around. I want to start by saying that every time I come to this conference, and I think this is maybe my 5th or 6th conference overall, 2 of those were virtual, I leave saying to myself, next year I'm not going to give talk. I'm just going to go and enjoy all the other talks and write down a lot of ideas. And then at some point during the year, an idea pops into my mind, and I think about it for several months, and then about the time during the summer when the call for proposals comes, by that time I generally have percolated it long enough that maybe it's turned into something. The primary way that that happened this year is that in February I was really lucky to be able to check a role off my acting bucket list. And that was when I was cast as Witch 2 in a production of Macbeth at my college. And in addition to the fact that I got to say, by the pricking of my thumb, something wicked this way comes, which was one of the major reasons I wanted that role. And that in and of itself, I want to point out, is prophecy. In addition to that, there was a particular rehearsal, not even a performance, I think, when I had just left the stage. We'd just done Act 1, Scene 2, which is the scene in which Macbeth and Banquo, on their way home from the conflict, have encountered the witches for the first time, and the witches have greeted Macbeth with these titles that are not his titles, right? Thane of Glamis, Thane of Cawdor. The third witch says, "Thou shalt be king hereafter." Macbeth says, "Why do you dress me in borrowed robes?" He's confused. He doesn't understand why they're greeting him with these titles that have not been given to him. The witches leave the stage at that point, and I was actually standing off stage when Scene 3 began, and in that scene, Macbeth says, not to Banquo, he's sort of in his own private echo chamber at this point, he says, "If chance will have me king, why, chance may crown me without my stir." And I thought in that moment, oh my gosh, that's just like Voldemort. It made me think immediately of the prophecy, and I thought to myself, you know, if Voldemort had had that realization, right, if I am going to be the most powerful wizard in the history of the world, maybe that will just happen. Maybe I don't really have to do anything to make it happen. The entire course of events in the series would have been different. Now, Banquo gives him some very good advice, and we're going to look at that a little bit later on. But again, Macbeth is not listening to Banquo at this point. Notice both of Macbeth's lines in this part of Act 1, Scene 3 are asides. Then he says, "Come what may, time and the hour runs through the roughest day." But I would argue that the course of events in the play develops from there as it does because he doesn't stick with "come what may," right? He decides instead he needs to take matters into his own hands, which leads to the death of Duncan and the people who were sleeping in the same room with Duncan and Banquo and Macduff's entire family except for him. So, and then in the summer when the call for proposals came, Lorrie, I think, sent out a message to Melissa and me, and she said, "Do you want to do the key chapters thing again?" And by that point, I had spent a lot of time thinking about the prophecy in the Harry Potter series and a few things that I wanted to say about that. So, just to review the prophecy, which I'm sure all of us could probably recite, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the 7th month dies. Let's take that apart for just a minute. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, obviously, as Dumbledore will explain to Harry in this chapter. That could easily have meant Harry Potter, but it also could have meant Neville Longbottom, because Neville's parents also have defied Voldemort 3 times. Born as the 7th month dies. There's a lot of discussion about, obviously, how that could apply to either of the 2 boys. And Dumbledore tells Harry, when they talk about the prophecy during this scene, when Harry says, so it might not mean me, Dumbledore says, on the contrary, it definitely does mean you. And the line that Dumbledore cites is this line, the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal. Dumbledore says, Voldemort chose you. He decided the prophecy applies to you. So it was Voldemort's interpretation of the prophecy, much more than the prophecy itself, that caused Harry to be in Voldemort's sights. Just as it is Macbeth's interpretation of the prophecy and his decisions about what he has to do once he's greeted with those titles that are not his yet. He will have power the Dark Lord knows not. This is obviously love. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives, which essentially is Harry's predicament, Voldemort's predicament too. And then repeating the line, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the 7th month dies. So, a lot of the important ideas in this chapter, actually, a lot of the important events concern Dumbledore himself. As you probably have learned yourself if you're a parent, when you're confronted with a child who is so angry at you that the child actually is shaking, there is nothing that will diffuse that anger faster than apologies. On your part, not on the part of the child. Dumbledore, when Harry is literally throwing things in his office, Dumbledore apologizes, and I'm going to say a little more about these ideas on subsequent slides, so that's why I'm not saying much now. He explains the full prophecy to Harry, and they discuss it. He identifies Harry's greatest source of protection. He assures Harry that Harry has his support and guidance. And he stresses the importance of facing one's fears. And I would add as well, he reiterates this theme about the importance of choice that's introduced at the end of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets in the line, "It is our choices, Harry, that determine who we really are far more than our abilities," which certainly applies to Voldemort as well, especially in relation to the prophecy. Okay, Dumbledore apologizes. He blames himself for Sirius Black's death. And this is a real connection, I think, between the chapter Lorrie just talked about and the chapter The Lost Prophecy. Dumbledore says he should have realized that because Voldemort had this ability to connect with Harry's mind, he should have known that when it became clear that there was trouble at the ministry, that Harry would go because he would presume that he needed to save Sirius. Dumbledore says he regrets delaying the explanation about Harry's scar and the significance of Harry's scar. And he blames himself for Voldemort's attack on Harry in the Ministry of Magic. He says essentially, I should have foreseen that all of this would happen. I should have prevented it. He explains why Voldemort has targeted Harry, and again, he stresses in that conversation the important role of choice there. He tells Harry about Harry's superiority to Voldemort, stressing this point about Harry as the marked child and also about Harry as someone who knows the value of love and who is able to love other people And he talks to Harry about his mother's protection of him, about the blood charm. And during that time, he also explains, as a part of discussing the power of the blood charm, why Harry had to live with the Dursleys, why that was the safest place for Harry to be during that time. Harry says, but Petunia Dursley, but my aunt hates me. And Dumbledore says, yes, but she took you. She was willing to have you there where you would be protected. Dumbledore also assures Harry of his continued support and guidance. And this is really important because this is a major point that Harry really has doubted. Part of the source of Harry's angst in Order of the Phoenix is he doesn't understand why Dumbledore isn't telling him things. Why, for example, at the conclusion of the scene in the Wizengamot, Dumbledore doesn't stay to talk to him. He simply disappears and doesn't answer any questions or give any explanations. And he makes yet another apology. He says, do you see, Harry, do you see the flaw in my brilliant plan now? I had fallen into the trap I had foreseen, that I told myself I could avoid, that I must avoid. Harry says, I don't, and Dumbledore cuts him off to say, I cared about you too much. I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth, more for your peace of mind than my plan, more for your life than the lives that might be lost if the plan failed. In other words, I acted exactly as Voldemort expects we fools who love to act. But another important point about the chapter, The Lost Prophecy, is that we learn, not from being told, but from actually seeing that episode for ourselves through the pensive, we learn that Sybil Trelawney got the big prophecy right. And I would argue that Order of the Phoenix is maybe really the first book in the series in which the reader really feels a fairly large amount of sympathy for Sybil, primarily because of the way she's treated by Dolores Umbridge. And because Dolores Umbridge seems to have no ill feelings at all about removing her from a place that's been her home for nearly 16 years. Dumbledore takes the memory out of the pensive. He describes meeting Trelawney in the Hogshead job interview, right, which he only granted her sort of as a courtesy because her great-great-grandmother, Cassandra Trelawney, was a seer with a really good reputation. Trelawney makes some prophecies. They don't seem to Dumbledore to really amount to anything important, and he's getting ready to leave when Trelawney goes into this sort of trance, and using a voice that Harry thinks to himself he's heard only one other time. I suppose we are to interpret that maybe as her serious voice, as opposed to the one we typically hear when she's speaking. She delivers this prophecy, and at the conclusion of that scene, after the prophecy fades from view, the narrative says, the silence within the office was absolute. We're told that even Fawkes at that point, whom I'll say more about in just a minute, is not making any noise. Now, I don't, unfortunately, have a lot of time for this portion of the presentation, but I just wanted to remind you that there is a long and extensive history of the importance of prophecy in hero myths. The course I teach at Ferrum is not called Harry Potter and the something. It's called the Hero Myth. And in that class, we talk about the fact that interpretation of dreams is sometimes a form of prophecy in hero stories. We talk about the story of Joseph from the Old Testament and the Torah. We talk about the Epic of Gilgamesh and the fact that Enkidu is often in the position of interpreting Gilgamesh's dreams, often with regard to telling him that he's dreamed about something that is likely to happen. We talk about the story of Moses and how the fact that Moses is ends up being separate from his birth family is not so much because of prophecy, but really because of the Pharaoh's fear about the size of the Hebrew population in Egypt. But it affects Moses in much the way that prophecy often affects infants. And then Moses himself, later in his life, is the author of several prophecies, the most important of which is the one about raising up another prophet, which is sometimes, I think, taken to mean Joshua, sometimes taken to mean Jesus. I guess that's a little ambiguous. The story of Jesus, obviously, is another example of well-known prophecies that we're familiar with and can probably recite. Not only the Annunciation to Mary, but also the response to the wise men when they come and ask I believe the scribes and the Pharisees, where will we find this baby who's born the King of the Jews? And the response is, "Oh, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel." The story of Oedipus is maybe one of the best examples of a hero story involving prophecy, and there are at least four in Oedipus. The first precedes Oedipus' birth. It's the prophecy from the oracle at Delphi that Laius will be killed by his own son, and for that reason, you know the story. Laius and Jocasta try very hard not to conceive a child, and then Laius gets drunk at a party, and, that admonition goes out the window. Maybe an example where we talk a lot about the significance of prophecy. The story of Arthur involves at least a couple of well-known prophecies. One is the one popularized by T.H. White and Thomas Mallory. I have to say, I'm always relieved when I try to talk about Arthur and Laurie's not in the room, because she's such an expert on that topic. Whosoever pulleth out this sword of this stone and anvil is rightwise king, born of all England. That's the really famous one, worded in almost exactly the same way in both Mallory and T.H. White. But also, the other prophecy about Arthur, which is in the history of the kings of Britain, when Merlin is brought in to interpret Vortigern's dream, because Vortigern's trying to build a castle and it won't stand up. It crumbles every night in the story, and Merlin comes in and says, well, that's because there's this pool of water under it, and there are these two dragons who are fighting. That is a chapter-length prophecy, much longer than Trelawney's, and replete with animal references. I think some people argue that that has something to do with the significance of animals and heraldry and the popularity of heraldry during the Middle Ages. Anyway, that prophecy takes an entire chapter to get through and includes a prediction about the coming of Arthur. I think this is my last example. Finally, I wanted to talk about the West African epic of Sundiata, which is a story of the founding of the empire of ancient Mali. Sundiata is, you probably know, the Lion King. This is, most people think, probably a basis for the Disney adaptation of the Lion King story. And in the beginning of that story, a couple of hunters bring a woman to Sundiata's father, the ruler Magan Konfata, and they say, "This is the woman you must marry, sire, for she will be the mother of him who will make the name of Mali immortal forever. This child will be the seventh star, the seventh conqueror of the earth." The woman that they're talking about, she's called the Buffalo Woman because she's able, apparently, to transfigure herself into the form of a buffalo, which kind of aligns with the idea of the Animagi, I think, in the Harry Potter series. And I am also interested, if you've read the extra canonical material written by Rowling about the African wizarding school at Ouagadougou, you will find, if you look at a medieval map of West Africa, and specifically the region of Mali, you'll find that that's an actual place name. And I think one of the primary reasons people tend to look for those maps is to kind of trace the path of Sundiata's life. Another interesting thing about Sundiata is that he was among the first in the world, I think, to author a charter of human rights. Probably not before the Magna Carta, but in the same century. And that's kind of interesting as well. And that's a hero story probably, at least until recent decades, we've read a lot less because it didn't originate in Western culture. So, yeah. So, some important questions about prophecy that I mostly want you to think about, but I'll offer just a few ideas about that. First, what difference does it make for the hero to know about the prophecy? We get Harry 800 pages or more into Order of the Phoenix when Dumbledore finally is explaining to him this prophecy. And it has been amply clear just 2 chapters before in the Department of Mysteries when Harry confronts Bellatrix Lestrange and she tries to get Harry to give her the prophecy. And Harry says, what sort of prophecy is this anyway? You know, what's it about? It's very clear that he doesn't really know anything about that. So this is news to him. And if you think about the way prophecy functions in stories like Oedipus's, what often happens, and I would say this is probably also true in Macbeth, is that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Second, what difference does it make for the story when prophecy is an element of the plot? One thing, obviously, is that it introduces possibilities for irony that possibly are not there if the hero does not know about the prophecy. Finally, what larger themes are suggested by the existence of prophecy? And generally, that involves things like, you know, the overarching power of some deities over human life, the concept of fate, questions about to what extent the choices we can make might alter the direction of the prophecy. Very quickly, I know my time is running out, I want to point out that it's important that throughout chapter 37 of Order of the Phoenix, there are all these images of new beginning. It's morning, the sun is coming up, that's mentioned several times throughout the chapter. Dumbledore's office has been restored to order since he left it when he was threatened with the possibility of going to Azkaban. Fawkes is a featherless chick again. He's starting over in his life cycle. And toward the end of the chapter, Harry hears his fellow students heading down to breakfast as that chapter ends. What's this imagery about new beginning all about? Well, it's about the Second Wizarding War, which is the title of chapter 38, the very next chapter. So in some ways, this chapter also seems to me like a very important pivot point in the series. You might argue that Harry's fate is not irrevocably headed in one direction until he finally decides to walk into the Forbidden Forest. But once he understands this prophecy, that is a really important turning point for him in terms of his thinking about the direction that is going to take. So back to Macbeth, quickly. And now I want to talk about Banquo's line. Notice that what Banquo says, again, when Macbeth is not listening, is, new honors come upon him, like our strange garments. Cleave not to their mold, but with the aid of use. Cleave not to their mold seems to me to say, don't get too enamored of these titles that all these folks have called you. Could Macbeth have taken that advice? Could Voldemort have decided to go after Neville rather than Harry, or perhaps some other kid whose name we don't even know? Not only would it have changed that character's life, but it would change also the entire direction of the series. Okay, I'm sorry if I went over my time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lana. Next, we have video, and I don't know.
No, it's fine. Yeah, we're just going to play the video from Melissa Aaron. Yep.
Okay. Oh, I am playing
Oh, sorry.
okay.
Shadow of the Wolf at the top there. Yep.
Okay.
Will be very Lupin-centric. That's my thing, werewolves, what they represent, and Lupin in particular. Given the subject matter, this talk also requires
Whoops. No, it's not. It has. I cannot get it to go back to the beginning. Yeah.
Also, it's personal. All my Lupin talks are personal. This chapter, Deathly Hallows, chapter 11, The Bribe, shows two character developments taking place in parallel. It reveals Lupin at his worst, hitting a nadir of toxic self-hatred and what it has meant to him to live as a werewolf. For Harry, it is part of a series of progressive losses of everything and everyone dear to him on his way to the Forbidden Forest. These begin with the dual loss of Hedwig and his firebolt. Hedwig is his only constant companion during his Dursley summers. The firebolt is a birthday gift from his beloved godfather Sirius and also part of his self-identity. Harry Potter, Quidditch player. That's who he is to himself, not Harry Potter, boy who lived, or Harry Potter, chosen one. Both Hedwig and the firebolt are significant losses. His break with Lupin, as we'll see, is the final rupture with childhood, the loss of the last parental figure Harry has ever had. At the beginning of the chapter, Harry, Ron, and Hermione have been completely isolated since their retreat to 12 Grimmauld Place and Arthur Weasley's Patronus message, family safe, do not reply, we are being watched. Like Sirius and his father, Harry is effectively a prisoner in his own home. With no knowledge of the present and a future probably destined to end in his death, Harry has nothing to connect to but his past, which he finds in Sirius's room in the previous chapter, Creature's Tale. Inside, there is a picture of three of his parental figures, James, Sirius, and Lupin, and a letter written by his mother, Lily. In a sense, all four of them are there with Harry, although a picture of Lily is curiously absent. Lupin arrives quietly, as always. The adverbs associated with him, calmly, quietly, coolly, lightly, can be seen as gentle, the result of iron self-control, or a combination of the two. However, he always announces himself as Remus John Lupin Werewolf. Being a werewolf to him is what defines him, first and foremost. His friendship with James and Sirius and the creation of the Marauders map comes second. His marriage to Tonks is third. Ron and Hermione greet him warmly while Harry immediately draws his wand and challenges him. Harry is not a child anymore, but an adult on a serious mission in a very dangerous world. Lupin is not insulted by this, but applauds Harry on having made the correct choice. As his ex-Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, he's proud. Ron and Hermione have a few points taken from Gryffindor, shaved off for carelessness. Lupin's arrival seems like the answer to a prayer. News of family, friends, and the world outside. But it's not. Reports of the family are distressing. Lupin refers to raids by the Ministry, narrow escape of Ron's family, the burning of Daedalus Diggle's house, and Tom's parents having the Cruciatus curse cast on them. His characterization of this as all right and otherwise okay doesn't help. The contents of the copy of the Daily Prophet that he brings with him is even worse, and Lupin isn't the supportive figure Harry, Ron, and Hermione were hoping for. The Prophet's announcement of the Muggle-born Registration Commission comes as a shock, especially to Ron. People won't let this happen, said Ron. It is happening, Ron, said Lupin. It's hard to accept something so dreadful. It couldn't happen here, until it already has. Ron has been somewhat sheltered. He's not used to prejudice being directed at him, and he doesn't understand it. His family doesn't show any prejudice towards Muggles and Muggle-borns. A certain amount of cluelessness, yes, but bigotry, no. His family's, and especially his father's, consistent pro-Muggle stance has insulated him from realizing that blood status prejudice and violence toward Muggles and Muggle-borns are so widespread and so vicious. Hermione and Lupin are used to being targets. They're more vulnerable, but also more used to brushing things off. Like Ron spitting, "Get away from me, werewolf," or insults from people like Malfoy, refusing to speak up or muttering like Hermione, "Ignore him, just ignore him." Resisting everything is exhausting and makes their lives more difficult. Ron's first thought is to protect the vulnerable person closest to him. What if purebloods and half-bloods swear a muggle-born's part of their family? I'll tell everyone Hermione's my cousin. Hermione points out that since they are with Harry, they're both in trouble anyway. It takes Lupin's report on what is happening to children headed for Hogwarts for the full extent of the atrocity to sink in. Harry felt sickened and angry. At this moment, excited 11-year-olds would be poring over stacks of newly purchased spell books, unaware that they would never see Hogwarts, perhaps never see their families again either. It's, he muttered, struggling to find words that did justice to the horror of his thoughts, but Lupin said quietly, I know. Lupin, bitten when he was 4 years old, has never been sheltered. As for Harry, he has been underestimating his mild, calm former DADA professor all along. It's a consistent theme that no one really understands Lupin and his affliction. He falls into the category that Chantal Bourgeau de Coudray calls the sympathetic werewolf, exemplified by Larry Talbot in The Wolfman. Talbot says repeatedly and miserably, you don't understand, you don't understand. It even becomes a punchline, as in Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein in The Wolfman. Talbot, you don't understand. Every night when the moon is full, I turn into a wolf. Wilbur, you and 20 million other guys. It's hard to comprehend that good person and person who can become a murderous monster is not mutually exclusive, but that's the nature of lycanthropy, the division of the human being and what Plato called the beast within. As it's expressed in The Wolfman, even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. It's much easier to insist that werewolves suffer from a permanent loss of moral sense, as does Professor Emerita Picardi in Lupine Lawlessness, Why Lycanthropes Don't Deserve to Live. To Dolores Umbridge and Snape, Lupin's not human and doesn't think like a human. Don't ask me to fathom how a werewolf's mind works, and extremely dangerous half-breed. In some ways, though, the kind misunderstanding he gets is worse. Minimization doesn't help. Harry insists that Lupin is normal right after Lupin tells the story of how he is bitten and by whom. Fenrir Greyback. Greyback's targeting children and plans to create an army of werewolf child soldiers, and his own failed attempts to persuade other werewolves not to join Voldemort. Tellingly, he refers to them as my fellows, my equals, and we werewolves, which Harry ignores in favor of defending Lupin from himself. But you are normal, said Harry fiercely. You've just got a problem. Lupin burst out laughing. Sometimes you remind me a lot of James. He called it my furry little problem in company. Many people were under the impression that I owned a badly behaved rabbit. Arthur's well-meaning attempt to cheer up his newly bitten fellow patient, whose medical team has been telling him that he could lead an almost more normal life, includes his sunny assessment of Lupin's situation. I said to him, didn't mention names, of course, but I said I knew a werewolf personally, very nice man who finds the condition quite easy to manage. Arthur doesn't know about the pain of transformations or notice that the werewolf has no visitors on Christmas Day. Lupin does notice and goes over to talk to him. In fact, some people seem to forget Lupin's a werewolf. Hermione was talking very earnestly to Lupin about her view of elf rights. I mean, it's the same kind of nonsense as werewolf segregation, isn't it? It all stems from this horrible thing wizards have of thinking they're superior to other creatures. It doesn't occur to her that she is wolf-splaining and that she accidentally suggested that werewolves aren't wizards or human. Top among those who minimize is Tonks, who doesn't listen, apparently not for the first time, when he tells her that he is too old, too poor, and too dangerous. Harry gets a cold dose of reality in this chapter when Lupin points out that, in fact, Harry doesn't understand and that the consequences of not understanding can be deadly. The physical and social reality of being a werewolf is real, horrible, and something none of them have ever seen. The first indication that something is wrong happens when Lupin volunteers to go with them, saying, "You know what I am and what I can do," not who I am, but what I am, i.e., a werewolf. Lupin is volunteering to be Harry's grayback. If nothing else, Harry does Lupin a favor by not letting him go down that path. The most important kind of love for Harry is parental love, something he had to grow up without, and it sets him and Lupin on a collision course. They each claim James is a hypothetical arbiter of their cases. "Harry, I'm sure James would have wanted me to stick with you." "Well," said Harry slowly, "I'm not. I'm pretty sure my father would have wanted to know why you aren't sticking with your own kid, actually." This prompts the first time Lupin says, "You don't understand," and Harry doesn't. Harry twists the knife partly from his own visceral anger and partly to goad Lupin on purpose. "I see," said Harry. "So you're just going to dump her and the kid and run off with us?" That would make Lupin into Tom Riddle Sr., one of the most despicable minor characters in the series. Lupin then really loses it for the first time. Lupin sprang to his feet. His chair toppled over backward, and he glared at them so fiercely that Harry saw, for the first time ever, the shadow of the wolf upon his human face. "Don't you understand what I've done to my wife and my unborn child? I should never have married her. I've made her an outcast." "You don't understand. Again, this is not a furry little problem." This is just a glimpse of Lupin the werewolf. All the reassurances that he's normal, that he finds the condition quite easy to manage, are blown away. Snape might hate Lupin, but he's right that there's no such thing as a tame werewolf. There are only human beings who are also werewolves, some of whom encourage the beast within, and some of whom try to keep it chained up at all costs. What's more, to the outside wizarding world, a werewolf is only and always a dangerous animal, and Harry has never seen that. "You don't know how most of the wizarding world sees creatures like me. When they know of my affliction, they can barely talk to me." Lupin is sure that his in-laws are disgusted by him. He spirals further. Lupin actually sees handfuls of his own hair. He looked quite deranged. "My kind don't usually breed. It will be like me. I know it." Notice that Lupin again aligns himself with and identifies himself as a werewolf and denies his humanity. "Creatures like me, my kind." His presumption that the child will be like him, i.e., a werewolf, is strange. Newt Scamander states that werewolves become werewolves only by being bitten. And while he makes mistakes, he's also the creator of the werewolf registry. Lupin has to know this. I've always thought that Lupin's real fear is that he will bite his own child, who might die or live as a werewolf like him. Given the untrue impression that victims inevitably become perpetrators, it's understandable. Harry continues to goad Lupin, pointing out that "my father died trying to protect my mother and me," accuses him of trying to be a daredevil, and finally calls him a coward, one of the worst insults in the ethos of the Harry Potter series. The situation escalates until Lupin attacks Harry with his wand, like a wizard, not like a werewolf with his teeth, and disappears. Harry tells Ron and Hermione it was easy, but his thoughts make it clear that it wasn't at all easy, any more than his former teacher's life is easy. He's lost the last parental figure he has, for all he knows, forever. At the same time, he thinks back on his other parents and their sacrifices. Broken images were racing each other through his mind, Sirius falling through the veil, Dumbledore suspended, broken in midair, a flash of green light and his mother's voice begging for mercy. "Parents," said Harry, "shouldn't leave their kids unless..." unless they've got to. But from Lupin's point of view, he is protecting his wife and his child in the only way he knows, which is to go away before he can hurt them. Harry even considers that his father would have judged him negatively for what he's done. But what's done is done, and he's seen Lupin in his totality, and it's extremely disturbing. Has he made a mistake? Hasn't. Lupin praises him later for his judgment, which is nearly always right, and shows up looking happier and younger than Harry has ever seen him. And when Harry calls back his 4 parental figures to stay with him on his walk to his death, Lupin is among them, happy and supportive. Nevertheless, Harry has lost something, and so have we, the loss of a comfort character. And Lupin has lost something too, the illusion of permanent self-control and the experience of revelation followed by rejection. Show the shadow of the wolf, and you will never be human again, even to the people who love you. And as someone with bipolar disorder who struggles with the beast within, that's a scary concept. Sorry, it's a downer chapter, especially for the Lupin identified, and it's only partway on Harry's journey of loss, but we can at least take comfort that it doesn't end there. Sometimes there is no way out but through. Mischief managed.